Hello! Today I will be discussing the science of light in the spiritualist works of Evelyn De Morgan, an English painter of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Much like a glass prism can be used to expand the scope of the visible world, the act of studying and painting light was the means by which Evelyn De Morgan attempted to materialize the mystical and bridge the gap between science and spiritualism. After the artist's death, an admirer of Evelyn De Morgan marveled at, quote, the existence of 1,000 secrets that will never be known in her work. Indeed, De Morgan's paintings are full of symbology that is unique to her. Over the years, De Morgan's paintings have been characterized by many things, like her studies in London and Florence and her association with the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. What should be more fully considered is De Morgan's engagement with Victorian spiritualism and science. To visually express her personal theology as it evolved, De Morgan especially gravitated towards the symbolism of light, both spiritually and scientifically. The cultural context that Evelyn De Morgan was born into in London in 1855 was shaped by monumental advances in science and technology. It was also shaped by spiritualism, a religious movement predicated on the belief that an unseen spirit world exists and that people on Earth could interact with it. A growing mainstream interest in the scientific method encouraged spiritualists to consider their sensory observations to be empirical evidence of the spirit world, highlighting a fascinating relationship between the material and the mystical. Over the course of De Morgan's career, light increasingly became a key symbol in her paintings, especially in her later years. While developing her unique symbology, I believe she would have looked to every available resource for inspiration, not just spiritual, but also scientific. As a spiritualist, Evelyn De Morgan was particularly interested in the concept of spiritual evolution, the gradual enlightenment of the soul that continues in the spirit world after death. She was also herself a practiced spirit medium. Alongside her husband, she conducted automatic writing sessions in the privacy of their home over the course of several years. These sessions would have gone like this. The first person, usually Evelyn, would hold a writing utensil, and the second person, usually her husband, would place his hand on her wrist. Then, entering a trance-like state, their hands would begin to move across the paper, with both participants believing they are being pulled automatically. Written communications would typically result, and these were interpreted as messages from the spirit world. For the De Morgans, many of these transcripts came from spirits who described their view of the spirit world and the progress of their own spiritual evolution. In 1909, the De Morgans anonymously published a book of transcripts from their years of automatic writing sessions. They called it The Result of an Experiment. The act of publishing these writings under this title indicates that they believed them to be both scientifically legitimate and spiritually significant. As a commercially successful artist and an active participant in spiritualism, Evelyn De Morgan did not paint in a vacuum. It makes sense that she would have gleaned concepts and imagery from 19th century sources to develop the rich symbology that is unique to her work, including the recurring symbol of light. First, I believe De Morgan would have been aware of Edwin D. Babbitt's The Principles of Light and Color, a well-known volume of research on the visible spectrum of light. Looking to science would have helped De Morgan legitimize and more fully formulate the light symbology she used in her spiritualist works. In Victorian culture, the boundaries between science and the supernatural were blurred. De Morgan would have viewed scientific discourse in tandem with spiritualist discourse. From Matter to Spirit, the result of 10 years' spirit manifestations, was well read by Victorians and was published by Evelyn's mother-in-law, Sophia De Morgan. It demonstrates key spiritualist practices and concepts in an empirical tone complete with diagrams. I will also reference Evelyn De Morgan's own automatic writing transcripts, The Result of an Experiment. To help shed some light on Evelyn De Morgan's unique light symbology, I will discuss two main themes. One, the relationship between prismatic refraction and her visualization of spiritual evolution, and two, the relationship between chromomentalism and her visualization of spiritual auras. The Rainbow Bridge, Prismatic Refraction and the Visible Spectrum. The use of a prism to observe the rainbow spectrum of refracted white light was key to scientific advances in the understanding of light. The process of using a crystalline tool to alter the scope of the visual world was also being applied to spiritualist experiments. Sophia De Morgan described the process of crystal seeing in From Matter to Spirit. Quote, "Having placed the glass on the table, covering it so closely as to shut out from it and from the spirit medium's eyes every vestige of light, she sat down in perfect quietness, gazing on the glass." The process of prismatic refraction was explained very similarly by Babbitt in the Principles of Light and Color. He wrote, quote, "When sunlight passes through a slit leading into a darkened room, and then through a triangular piece of glass called a prism, the rays of light are separated by refraction into their constituent colors on the same plan as the rainbow, and fall in an oblong figure on the opposite wall." The fact that crystal seeing and prismatic refraction required similar tools, conditions, and actions must have been compelling to spiritualists. This painting is called "The Kingdom of Heaven Suffereth Violence, and the Violent take it by Force." It depicts an allegory of the soul's journey from spiritual darkness to enlightenment, represented by the same female figure, likely a self-portrait, repeated 10 times. The Kingdom of Heaven embodies the successive phases of a soul growing up into the light, a phrase borrowed from a transcription in the result of an experiment. The refraction of light into a rainbow spectrum provides a compelling symbol for the soul's gradual spiritual enlightenment. The bottommost figures in this painting wear monochromatic gray drapery and shirk away from the bright light above. They are surrounded by translucent, disembodied hell spirits. Moving upwards, the figure's drapery progresses from brownish gray to violet to indigo to green, and then to orange, indicating enlightenment by degrees as they begin to look up. These 4 colors appear in the order of the rainbow spectrum as discussed by Babbitt, and their placement on the canvas even mirrors Babbitt's characterization of the visible spectrum as, quote, "colors which fall upon a screen in an oblong rainbow-colored form, the red being refracted least and the violet most from a straight line." In other words, the violet-clad figure is furthest away from the fullness of spiritual enlightenment because violet light refracts the farthest from the white light source. At the top of the composition, 3 white-clad figures actively reach upwards towards the light, where they will be freed from the confines of the physical body, like the heavenly spirits who accompany them, and enter the plane of invisible light that stretches beyond the canvas and beyond the visible spectrum. The journey to enlightenment begins with the violet-clad figure, who is furthest from the light and still bears the chains and the golden crown that indicate worldliness. This parallels Babbitt's assertion that violet light waves refract the farthest from the light source and penetrate more deeply than the other colors on the spectrum, with red light reaching and penetrating the very least. If a viewer is to understand that the repeated figure in the Kingdom of Heaven is growing increasingly permeable and moving ever closer to spiritual enlightenment, it makes sense that her drapery would first be penetrated by the violet light. Each successive color then acts as a rainbow bridge from total darkness and impermeability across the visible spectrum of colors to the composite wholeness of full enlightenment. Spiritual auras and psychic lights and colors. Just as the rainbow spectrum can only be seen by refracting white light through a prism, it was understood that a person's spiritual aura could only be seen by entering into a trance-like state. What may have been especially fascinating to a spiritualist like De Morgan is Babbitt's scientific assertion that humans radiate colored energy in the form of psychomagnetic curves or psychic lights and colors. In a new scientific discipline he called chromomentalism, Babbitt explained that psychological force projects from the brain and manifests as a system of curved rays of light. Interestingly, Babbitt explained, quote, "The psychic lights and colors are inexpressively beautiful and manifest the infinite activities of nature unseen by ordinary eyes. Higher vision exalts the conception and shows that there is a grander universe within the visible." From Matter to Spirit describes the spiritual aura, which can be seen by spirit mediums in a trance-like state as, quote, "the gathering of the life force or nerve spirit from every part of the body in the head, where it again reissues as a stream of electric light passing from the head." In The Result of an Experiment, spirits refer to spiritual auras as flames that come round people like halos, only fanned by motion. Additionally, Babbitt's research asserted the healing capabilities of light in the same way that From Matter to Spirit asserted the healing capabilities of spiritual energy, which Sophia De Morgan referred to as light. Babbitt concluded that colored lights on the red or thermal end of the visible spectrum had the effect of being exciting to the blood. In contrast, colored lights on the opposite violet or electric end of the spectrum were cooling and soothing to the nerves. These are two chromatically opposite, yet thematically connected paintings by Evelyn De Morgan. Angels Piping to the Souls in Hell, on the left, portrays spirits ascending to heaven, and Our Lady of Peace, on the right, portrays spirits descending to earth. Both images appear to explore the concept of the spiritual aura, visualized in the colorful curves of light as described by Babbitt, Sophia De Morgan, and in The Result of an Experiment. Angel Piping to the Souls in Hell depicts curves of hot light that undulate around the flaming, disembodied heads of agitated spirits. The swirls of light thrust the spirits up towards the piping angel, who leads their journey from the craggy landscape of hell towards heaven beyond the canvas. The thermal tone of this painting perhaps indicates, in Babbitt's terms, an excitement of the blood. The spirits are rapidly growing up into the light and taking the next step in their spiritual evolution, which requires them to reckon with and leave behind their earthly sorrows and regrets. Visually, the painting also echoes a passage from The Result of an Experiment, wherein a spirit described seeing Evelyn De Morgan's spiritual aura. It said, quote, "Evelyn is red in her flames, a most peculiar thing. It means a very strange, sudden growth." The warm-colored lights indeed indicate a sudden growth of the hell spirits in this painting, catalyzed by the piping angel who is forcing them to leave hell. Our Lady of Peace depicts a soldier who experiences a miraculous vision of the Virgin Mary, who descends from heaven to answer his prayer. Like the piping angel, Mary is ushering in the healing light of spiritual enlightenment, which curves in rainbow lines around her figure and towards the soldier. In contrast to the fiery hues of the piping angel, the swirling aura carries cooler tones and the disembodied heads of heavenly spirits, perhaps indicating a calming of the nervous system bestowed upon the soldier, who is desperate for peace in wartime. Like violet light on the visible spectrum, her message traveled very far from its spiritual source to reach its physical destination. Another conclusion drawn by Babbitt's research is that the psychic lights and curves that appear dazzling white represent the highest and most heaven-facing faculties of the brain, encompassing spiritual fullness through the harmony of all component colors of the rainbow and their associated qualities. The white vibrational lines of Mary's halo suggest the fullness of her spiritual enlightenment that is revealed by degrees to the soldier as a source of comfort from the spirit world. The same concept applies to how the composite colors of the visible spectrum add up to the wholeness of white light, its parts only revealed through the use of a glass prism. For Evelyn De Morgan, art, much like a prism or a spirit medium's trance, was the tool by which she bridged the gap between the seen and the unseen, the physical and the spiritual, and the darkness and the light. In conclusion, the observation that Evelyn De Morgan's work contains 1,000 secrets may always remain accurate, but it is worth considering how Victorian discourse on science and spiritualism informed the way De Morgan painted light as part of the unique symbology in her later paintings. Her work is not merely derivative of her artist peers or impossible to understand within the context of mainstream Victorian culture. Rather, De Morgan's later paintings perhaps demonstrate her engagement with contemporary discourse on spiritualism, science, and the infinitely rich intersection of the two realms, wherein Evelyn De Morgan developed her symbology of light in her lifelong quest to reconcile the material and the mystical, and to grow up into the light herself. Thank you.